After having played Final Fantasy 15 since launch, I think I've gained enough information to form a worthwhile opinion about the game. For starters, I just want to say that the game is good, it's beautiful to look at, fun to play, and has enjoyable characters, for the most part. However, there are a series of issues with this game that I also want to address in this review. The story is the driving force of the game. It is what allows you to make sense of what you're doing when you're doing it. The concept of the game is simple. You are Noctis, Prince of Insomnia. Your kingdom is at war with the Niflheim Empire, and in order to broker peace between the two nations, you are to marry the Empire's ward, Lady Luna Freya. However, while you and your friends are traveling to the wedding, you hear word of the Empire's betrayal. They attacked Insomnia, killed the king, your father, and have taken your bride as prisoner. Now it is up to you, your bodyguard Gladiolus, your advisor Ignis, and your best man Prompto to rescue Luna, topple the Niflheim Empire, and to reclaim your throne. Now, for the most part, this storyline is presented fairly well. You feel the tension slowly but surely build up among your group members as events unfold, which makes your party members feel surprisingly real at times. But this wouldn't be a Final Fantasy game if it didn't have more twists and turns than a freaking Mobius strip. While it is easy to understand the plotline within the first few chapters, as you progress through the games, things start becoming increasingly convoluted. You find yourself asking, who's this guy? The fuck is this magical tree? Why is there a giant trying to kill me? For me personally, I had to sit through 3 separate YouTube videos to finally feel like I had a grasp over the plot, which is so sad to say because the plot is good. Once you finally understand everything, you start to see the incredible attention to detail in the game. You can understand who the hell this guy is, you can understand the fuck this tree is, you can understand the motivations and the driving force for just about every enemy you face. I only wish that I understood all this by playing the actual game instead of sitting through 40 minutes of random people putting all these pieces together for me. I'm not playing Dark Souls here, I'm playing fucking Final Fantasy. It is important to note though, that Square Enix has said they plan to enrich certain aspects of the game, which will possibly include additions to the storyline throughout 2017. But when I pay $60 for a game, I expect to play the actual game I paid for there and then. What you're telling me is that on the day of the official release, what I essentially got was the early access version of the game. I'm not going to review your game as if it was the early access version. We advertise it as the official release, so me and other reviewers like me can only review it as the official release. That being said, I'd pretty much summarize the plot as very average at best due to the way it is presented. With more polish coming up in the future, we might see some improvements. The combat is pretty fun. At first glance, it reminded me a lot of Guild Wars 2. Does anyone still remember Guild Wars 2? Well, they are pretty fucking similar combat. Your moveset is based on the weapons you pick. Similar weapon types give off similar movesets, which at first glance you might wonder if the gameplay won't get a bit repetitive over time, but due to the sheer amount of weapons and the variety of different magical bomb things you can create, you can use some pretty impressive combo attacks. And to top it all off, you can unlock through story missions or just general exploration certain artifacts belonging to Noctis' ancestors, each of which having their own unique attack animations and abilities. You also have access to a type of skill tree for you and your party members. It is clear that the developers took inspiration from games like Skyrim and The Witcher 3 when it comes to the actual gameplay, and the game benefits from it immensely. Everything looks and feels great, so it absolutely kills me that I barely get to see what I'm doing. I have thought long and hard about how to describe combat, and the only word I have is clusterfuck. Unless you feel 100% comfortable with the controls, have perfect situational awareness, and know exactly what you're doing, it is impossible to tell what the fuck is happening. A huge part of this is the abysmal camera. You'll spend more time looking at trees than you do looking at a snake monster trying to feast on your bone marrow. This needs to be fixed. As it is right now, I spend half the fight fiddling with the right stick, trying to change the camera angle. But the moment you get that camera right, is the moment you get to witness the game's splendor. And it is amazing. I recall 2 separate times while playing the game that I actually jumped out of my chair due to sheer hype. This is something I haven't done since I played Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance. Needless to say, combat is one of Final Fantasy XV's strengths. As you probably know, Final Fantasy XV is an open world game. Something that is very important for an open world game is that it feels like a living and breathing world. Square Enix has nailed this. The game looks and feels lived in. The landscapes look as if they could exist somewhere on Earth, yet maintain some of the more fantastical elements that the series is known for. Every area has its own history, which is organically explored either through idle dialogue between party members or through visual cues that the player themselves can pick up from just looking around. Final Fantasy XV does an extremely good job of world building, and it is this world that continuously draws me back into the game. A trope that open world games are known for are repetitive and dull side missions. Unfortunately, Final Fantasy XV hasn't deviated from this. There are tons of side missions that pop up as the classic question mark on your map, which you may choose to partake in if you want to. The problem is that the same NPC gives you the same side mission just in various locations. It reminds me a lot of the infamous daily quests WoW NPCs will give players. Needless to say, I skipped most of these side missions once I realized I could be having more fun doing monster hunts than collecting Dave's little dog shits. What I will say though is that some of these side missions actually cater to things you're going to do anyway. Some side missions give you bonuses for fishing, and some actually lead to the tombs of your ancestors where you find ancient weapons. Side missions for Cindy can even improve the regalia of your trusty train. I would call it a car, but that would imply you can move in more than 2 directions. Which is another important thing to mention. You have very lackluster control over your car. It is entirely on rails. The only vehicle you feel like you have any semblance of control over is the Chocobo, so I suggest getting that as early as possible. As I mentioned earlier, there are monster hunts in the game. Most of these are pretty straightforward, go here, kill this kind of thing. However, some of them have entire storylines and cutscenes dedicated to them. Personally, I would recommend doing some, seeing as it is, in my opinion, the most enjoyable side activity, and there's quite a few, so it should keep you busy for a while. A worry that a lot of people had when the game first came out was how well it ran. I have, in my 50 or so hours of gameplay, experienced a few frame rate drops, but that's about it. I have heard though that it runs worse on the PS4 Pro, but I imagine patches will come out for that shortly. All in all, I would like to say that the open world experience is good. It is a start for content and it has many locations that the storyline doesn't cover, which gives you the room to explore and gives you a reason to come back after you beat the game. There are also various raids and dungeons to explore in your own time. In my opinion, I rank the open world as worse than that of Skyrim or The Witcher 3, however it is still a very good open world experience. It's just a bit of a shame that it is so underused in the actual story, which brings me to the next segment. In the final third of the game, the story picks up and takes the spotlight. These segments are separated from the open world and in my opinion suffer from it. It results in an endless number of linear hallways and scripted sequences, which feels like a massive disconnect from what the game has been up until this point. Even the combat changes, and while a part of me feels as though this was a risky and respectful move by Square, the other part of me feels as though I'm playing a different game from the one that I bought. That is not to say that this part of the game is terrible. In many ways, this is the emotional highlight of the game, and this is where you really start getting into the feels. However, the gameplay mechanics for these areas are obviously unpolished. I won't go into much more detail than this, but I'll say is that while the story in these areas are the best, the gameplay is by far the worst. After suffering through a few of these sequences, you'll eventually get back into the same old gameplay that you did from the start, and the game finishes off spectacularly with one of my favorite Final Fantasy boss fights to date. The game suffers from many flaws, which are in large part due to the lack of context presented or lack of polish in some areas. However, it also presents you with one of the most intriguing Final Fantasy villains to date, some of the most lovable party members, and a vast and gorgeous world for you to explore and fall in love with. Combat is fun and enjoyable, and allows the player to be creative in their approach. I would personally recommend Final Fantasy XV at full price, but if you're worried about some of the issues I've mentioned, you might do best by waiting until Square patches the game in 2017 and pick it up on sale. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for future reviews.